very high level. I want to start out with a little fracas in the contemporary left having to do with Carl Schmitt. I can start out in some different places that have more or less the same roots, such as the more recent fracas over Adorno's so-called democratic authoritarianism, based on a document that was sent to a committee run by Carl Friedrich, which was trying to get the U.S. into the war in the late 30s, in which he said, no, you have to actively move against anti-democratic forces and suppress them. This was seen by some contemporary people on the left as not only shocking, but a sign of authoritarianism. So he is constituted in 1968. But this right here, that more recently starts the bigger controversy over Silos and its over the last 10 years, and Carl Schmitt. So the reason Carl Schmitt's a name of a lot of people is that in his career, he switched from adding with a technocrat and the most range of career to signing up with Nazism and being a ground jurist of Nazism. This Edward Heidner, this dissertation that didn't turn out very well, and they didn't start Schmitt, and they didn't really use anything to do with it, but he continued to write in more or less Nazi vein during the entire Nazi episode, and after the war was locked up, for some time, scripted this role in the second year, we sort of thought he had written our Republic in more or less the same vein, so we didn't exactly have to use what sort of updated views. So why is Schmitt so important? Here's about Schmitt. Well, if you're in Frankfurt School, you ought to hear about Schmitt because both narrations were heavily indebted to Schmitt for an understanding of what the nature of contemporary politics was, what the future held for politics, and they ruthlessly appropriated Schmitt's ideas. Now, when he became a Nazi, they pretended that they weren't ruthlessly appropriating his ideas, so they were violently critical of him, but they still absorbed a huge amount of it. Second generation comes along, and Auerbach's writing Structural Transformation of the Sphere, which is essentially a document about Schmitt and his politics. Only it inverts the story, turns it into a Marxist story, but it takes up virtually the same themes. And the thing that's really in common between the two of them is their ideal of what liberal democracy is supposed to do. And what it's supposed to do is provide a forum in which there's representation, that representatives argue among themselves, so it's government by discussion, and their Schmitt and Mimmels would say, look, people have to be persuaded about reality and to change the result of this discussion. Habermas ramps this up into the ideal situation that we'll talk about very briefly in a short period of time. The idea is some sort of idealized discussion politics that takes ultimately the opposite democratic solution. Schmitt wasn't for democratic solutions, but he did think that at some point in the past, there had been a kind of little discussion that had disappeared out of the Weimar Republic, and he predicted that this kind of sham liberalism considered at the time would collapse, and would collapse into the rule of totalizing parties, which is the anti-constitutional parties that are around the Weimar Republic. So I'll get into sort of the details of that. But that's the Schmitt story. So why would people be so upset about a serious discussion about Schmitt? It's kind of equivalent to something, and perhaps a lot of things that are more complex than just the fact that Schmitt was a Nazi. People must have a problem talking about Heidegger. He was a Nazi. But Schmitt seems to press everybody's buttons in some other ways. And I think there's something pretty fundamental going on here. Not the only fundamental thing, there's something important having to do with sort of two ways of thinking about politics that really come into conflict. They come into conflict both on the left and on the right. And one of the odd features of the current situation is people like Chantal Mouffe are quoting Oshad and quoting Schmitt and are very anti-Habermasian. And people on the sort of Habermasian side are very upset about this kind of discussion of politics. But figuring out what's really going on here is a little bit tricky. But the reason it has kind of an important emotional charge is the events of the late Weimar Republic, the role of the left in the demise of the Weimar Republic, and the tremendous guilt and anxiety about those events that runs through the whole rest of the career of the Frankfurt School. I knew some of these people from this generation. I knew J.P. Mayer, who was the discoverer of the early Marx manuscripts. He was archivist for the SPD and found them, moldering away, and published them. And he was also the book review editor for Marx, and so every book review he did went out to 80 SPD papers. He was central. He was a very young man, but he was at the center of these things. And he could, at age 85, he could review every single event leading up to the collapse of the Weimar Republic. And what they thought about was, could we have done something different? And they were obsessed with this problem. It was their guilt issue. They were guilty about the rise of Hitler, but they were certainly guilty or concerned about their role in the collapse of the Weimar Republic. Okay. Now, so that's another piece of background. Okay, so here's, let me just quote you some pronouncements on the Schmitt question. This is Alan Wolf. This is a widely distributed Harvard or something like this. It says that thinkers on the left, impressed by Schmitt's no-nonsense attacks on liberalism and his contempt for Wilsonian idealism, see Schmitt as someone who, very much like themselves, opposed humanism in favor of an emphasis on world power in modern society, a perspective that has more in common with post-structuralists like Charles Foucault than with liberal thinkers such as John Rawls. So the attitude of this left, according to Wolf, is that anything would be better than Marx's contemporary John Stuart Mill and his legacy, and that in turning to Schmitt rather than liberalism, they clung fast to an authoritarian strain in Marxism, represented by such 20th century thinkers as Lenin and Gramsci. Okay, so that really sort of draws the line. They like Schmitt because of the power-hungry, power-oriented guy. And the correct view is something like nil, which is that if you discuss things long enough, the truth will out and we get justice and so on and so forth. What this links together is like Walsh, who sort of see the current bill, and Hobbes, who also is in favor. So you've got two kinds of leftists here, and they advertise one another. And I think this is puzzling, but Schmitt serves as kind of a flashpoint for this kind of discussion. Okay, so the Weimar Republic. Let's talk about that for a moment. This is a hidden source of this problem, and it's interesting to read later Frankfurt School writings in terms of what they reveal about their attitudes toward this question. I already mentioned Adorno. He seems to have learned the lesson that you got to put down parties that are threats to democracy. That wasn't the lesson that they had learned at the time. That's something they learned from their experience. And this is what the experience was. Schmitt, Weimar Republic was a very strange creature. It had a very normal constitution, so forth, but it had a party structure that was paralyzing and made politics into something sort of unfamiliar to Americans. Parties were interest parties or anti-constitutional ideological totalizing parties. The totalizing parties were, actually were sort of a bit like the babies in the U.S. We went to communist kindergartens, communist summer camp, and so on and so forth. Well, this is the way these parties were organized as well. Your entertainment, your newspaper, your social life all came from party membership. And the Nazi like this, they have not spoiled us. Whatever you need in terms of social life, they provided in the context of parties and the totalizing parties with the totalizing ideology. And what that meant was they weren't open to discussion. So they wanted to make their points, and they used Parliament as a way of taking stands. But they were waiting for the moment in which they could take over. They weren't compromising in terms of their fundamental ideological ideas. Then there were some other parties that were less totalizing, and the SPD was also an ideological interest party, but was a little looser about these things. And the other parties were more fragmented. There really wasn't a liberal presence in Weimar. A lot of people were constitutional Marxists. That's what the Republic was on put out there. So the Republic itself didn't have a lot of constitutional support, but it had the big problem of two major anti-constitutional parties, or were anti-constitutional parties, the Nazis and the Communists. They were excluded from participation. They didn't want to participate. They wanted to preserve their purity, and they simply didn't play the game of compromise, much less sort of open discussion. Okay. So, the Weimar Republic, according to Schmitt analyzed this in terms of sort of art history of liberalism. That once upon a time, maybe in the 19th century, there was this kind of discussion that liberalism presupposed. It didn't happen in Weimar parliamentarism, and therefore you can ask the question of, okay, is this a stable situation, or is it going to morph into some next stage? And just looking at those parties, and especially the totalizing parties, he predicted that, look, this was going to collapse, and one of the totalizing parties is going to win, and then we'll have a totalitarian state. That was inevitable. There wasn't really any way of solving the problem of going back to a kind of liberalism that Germany had never really had in the first place. So this was kind of a false ideal. Parliament was kind of sham, and he was the only one that said that. Everybody said it. It was a universal understanding of the failures of the Weimar Republic. And throughout Europe, so it was the case of Italy, people were dissatisfied with the parliamentary governments that they had gotten after the Civil War. And all of them were more or less paralyzed, more or less the same reasons. They had very strong interest parties. The interest parties couldn't expand beyond their particular constituencies. They couldn't lose those constituencies. They competed with one another for the same constituency, but they never could become majority parties. They only governed coalitions. And on the left especially, there was a tremendous amount of reluctance to actually evolve government states for what state had to do. SPD did several times. Each time it did different. So right in the war, it agreed to put down some of the things and work with the military and so on and so forth. But it was clear that this was seen by a constituency as getting its hands dirty and being immoral. And so it was something that they couldn't do without risking the loss of the younger workers to the communists. And they were hyper concerned, quite correctly, with this. And their political strategy had to do with this. So they didn't compromise. They were very moralistic in their pronouncements. But under the table, they did compromise. They worked very effectively for the working class, but they did it by making deals and pretending they weren't making deals. But actually, when on Parliament and how they actually governed were two different things. And a lot of the decision-making resulted from this kind of funny arrangement between the SPD and the Center Party, which was the Catholic centrist party. Okay, now, so what did the Frankfurt? So that's Schmitt's story on this is, we're going to hell in a handbasket. It's inevitable that this system will collapse into totalitarianism. So what did the Frankfurt do? Well, interestingly enough, there were his students in Albert Einstein, this was his freshman. He was also a critic of the Weimar Constitution. And he used that Schmitt's language that it was a decisionless constitution. It was a very funny constitution. It had a sort of liberal part, which gave you basic rights, and kind of an aspirational part, which had to do with social rights. And the aspirational stuff wasn't really enforceable. Other stuff, had to do with property rights and so on, was more or less really enforceable. So by failing to really reconcile these things and having a consistent constitution, the Constitution didn't really provide a whole lot of direction for the state. And So from Schmidt's point of view, that was a problematic feature of the Constitution itself. It was also a problematic feature from the program's point of view. We wrote a famous paper on this, which